Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Shifting Gears. My name's Greyson Harris. That's Whitney Cowell.
Hey.
And we're here to talk about the same thing that everyone else has been talking about for the past week, the Titan submersible that went missing while searching for the Titanic. We have our thoughts on it, for sure. So did the internet. The internet let all of those thoughts out in the form of memes immediately.
So a lot of feelings.
Oh yeah, the tragedy to meme ratio, like the speed at which that went, was probably the quickest tragedy to meme ratio I've ever seen in my life. But yes, we are here to talk about the Titan tragedy. Basically, we're just going to go ahead and get into the story of it, what happened, what went wrong. Towards the end of it, we'll kind of get into our opinions and talk about some of the minutia around all this. Let's just get right into it, yeah? On June 18th, 2023, a privately owned submersible called Titan, operated by OceanGate, was carrying 5 people on a tourist expedition to observe the wreck of the Titanic in the North Atlantic Ocean, about 400 nautical miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. Communication with Titan was lost 1 hour and 45 minutes into its dive. Authorities were alerted when it failed to resurface at the scheduled time later that day. A search and rescue operation was conducted by an international team led by the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Navy, Canadian Coast Guard. After a search lasting nearly 80 hours that completely captivated public interest around the world, a remotely operated underwater vehicle deployed from Canada's Horizon Arctic vessel discovered a debris field containing parts of Titan about 1,600 feet from the bow of the Titanic. Among the deceased there were OceanGate's co-founder and CEO, Stockton Rush. Also among them was Shahzada Dawood, a billionaire Pakistani-British businessman, and his 19-year-old son, Solomon. Hamish Harding, a British businessman, aviator, and explorer, and Paul-Henri Nargeolet, a former French Navy commander and director of underwater research for EM Group and RMS Titanic, which actually owns the salvage rights to the wreckage site of the Titanic. Nargeolet led more than 35 expeditions to the Titanic and was widely considered the leading authority on the wreck site. The exact cause of the implosion is still under investigation, but Titan's sudden demise was anything but surprising to those who knew Stockton Rush and his dangerous reputation for cutting corners in the name of innovation. Before we dive into what went wrong, who is Stockton Rush, what is OceanGate, and why were they willing to risk their lives to see an underwater graveyard for over 1,500 people? So who's Stockton Rush? Who is
fancy?
Who is this
with
gentleman?
A name like that?
You have no idea how fancy this guy actually is. Stockton Rush was born to a wealthy family in San Francisco, March 31st, 1962. He's actually a descendant of 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence, Richard Stockton, Benjamin Rush, hence the name. He began scuba diving at the age of 12 and became a commercial pilot at 18 years old, which I did not know was possible.
Could you imagine getting on a plane and an 18-year-old walking up and saying, "You ready?" I would not get on that plane.
Let's go.
But later on, he was told that his visual acuity would disqualify him from becoming a military pilot. So Rush's career history includes working as a flight test engineer for McDonnell Douglas, a venture capitalist at a San Francisco law firm, and he also ran a technology company in Washington. So he did just whatever he felt like doing. So, discouraged that his dreams of becoming a military pilot would not come true, he instead focused his attention away from the skies and towards the depths of the ocean, as you do, I guess.
Sure.
So, Rush wanted to purchase his own submersible and explore the ocean, but he quickly learned that there were fewer than 100 of these privately owned submersibles in the world. Don't you just hate when you go to Amazon to get a sub and out of stock?
Right.
That sucks. Yeah. So his solution, as anyone else would do, was to build his own miniature sub using blueprints provided to him by a retired U.S. Navy submarine commander. Sub was 12 feet long and can dive to a depth of 30 feet.
I think somebody told this young man, "You can be anything you put your mind to." And he said, "I believe you.
I'm going to be a fish." So in 2009, Rush explored the idea of founding his own submarine company. If you can't find submarines on the market, just go build your own. Why not? And thus, OceanGate was born. And just off the top, OceanGate sounds like a scandal.
It super does.
It super does. No one vetted this first. So what is OceanGate other than a horrible name for a company? Based in Everett, Washington, OceanGate was founded with the goal of using commercial tourism to support the development of new deep diving submersibles that would enable further commercial ventures, including resource mining and disaster mitigation. Wealthy tourists are paying to fund scientific research and innovation, so technically it's a good cause, right? So there are scientists who are accompanying these rich people that are doing these extreme tourism things, and they're gathering data, and they're basically getting funded by these billionaires. Do the means justify the ends? You can make your own judgment at the end of this. OceanGate initially intended to operate a small fleet of 5-person subs that could be leased by any organization or group of individuals. I'm going to read that again. Any organization or group of individuals.
The risk. The sheer risk.
Yeah.
They did not have an HR department.
No. They weren't the first to try this out. The underwater tourism industry began in 1986 with Atlantis Adventures, now known as Atlantis Submarines, taking passengers to coral reefs near the Grand Cayman Island. In 2003, more than 2 million passengers had collectively paid $150 million on submarine tours. However, these tours were generally in shallow depths and they were regulated. Rush's experience and research, quotations around those, led him to believe that he had discovered an unmet business opportunity to expand the market of private ocean exploration. He believed that this industry had been held back by 2 principal factors. Number 1, submersibles having what he called an unwarranted reputation as dangerous vehicles. Number 2, rigid government regulations that he believed stifled innovations in the industry. Just going to let that one sit for a second. In 2019, Rush stated that the Passenger Vessel Safety Act of 1993, quote, needlessly prioritized passenger safety over commercial innovation. So the company's first submersible was named Antipodes. It was a used 5-person vessel with a steel hull. So between 2010 2013, the company carried out an estimated 130 dives with Antipodes. That submersible assisted with multiple scientific research expeditions, including mapping the wreckage of the SS Governor, which sank in 1921. In 2015, OceanGate pivoted to designing its own submersibles with unique designs that were cost-effective. Keyword there. Their first custom-built sub, Cyclops 1, was built in collaboration with the University of Washington and Boeing.
Which I have to say, Boeing has caught a lot of heat in recent years. Some troublesome trips with their planes.
And there's big quotation marks around collaboration, as we'll get to. The first of many questionable cost-cutting decisions was the use of a 12-year-old steel hull from a retired submersible to create Cyclops 1. So right off the bat, he is cutting corners and trying to make a cost-effective submersible when I wouldn't imagine he's necessarily strapped for cash. I think that he could probably afford to save up a little bit and not cut those corners. But as we will learn, this was a trend in his life and not something that me or anyone else could talk about. So the Titan submersible. Let's learn more about the actual bathtub that went missing looking for the Titanic. All right, so in 2020, Rush announced the development of a new submersible, originally called Cyclops 2, that could reach maximum depths of 20,000 feet. Development and manufacturing of the hulls would be conducted at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Titan, as it would later be named, would become the first ever privately owned submersible with an intended depth of more than 13,000 feet. It was also the first sub that used a hull that was constructed of titanium and carbon fiber materials. Most other human-carrying submersibles at the time were designed with an all-metal pressure vessel due to carbon fiber's tendency to weaken faster with repeated use. Rush said in a 2021 interview, "I've broken some rules to make Titan. I think I've broken them with logic and good engineering behind me. The carbon fiber and titanium. There's a rule that you don't do that. Well, I did." Rush also told Travel Weekly editor-in-chief that the carbon fiber had been sourced at a discount from Boeing because it was too old for use in the company's airplanes. Even Boeing was like, no, we're not using this. Boeing also stated that they have no records of any sale to Rush or to OceanGate. Titan could move at a blistering speed of roughly 3.5 miles an hour, and its steering was controlled by a wireless gaming controller that you can buy on Amazon for about $30.
I've heard that that's actually surprisingly common.
You would be surprised at how common it actually is, but the optics of it, when combined with what I'm about to read, make it quite a bit of a problem. Lights inside the submersible were purchased from Camping World. Construction pipes recycled from old construction sites used as ballasts. In 2022, CBS reporter David Pogue was on board Titan when it became lost and could not locate the Titanic during a dive. Lost for roughly 2.5 hours. Pogue commented to Rush that it seems like this submersible has some elements of MacGyvery jerry-riggedness. To which Rush laughed and stated that although they do value cost efficiency, the important stuff, like the hull, they don't cut any corners there. We make sure that that's the top of the line, safest thing possible. In another 2022 dive through the Titanic, one of the thrusters on Titan was accidentally installed backwards, and the submersible started spinning in circles when trying to move forward near the seafloor. Because Titan operated in international waters and did not carry passengers from a port, it was not subject to safety regulations. So this vessel was not certified as seaworthy by anyone. No third-party organization, no privately owned organization, no government. OceanGate's reasoning for this: the vast majority of marine and aviation accidents are a result of operator error, not mechanical failure. Well, isn't that ironic? As we move into the next section, the disappearance of Titan. Preparations for the launch, June 16th through June 17th. All right, Titan was loaded aboard the research and expedition ship named MV Polar Prince and then departed from Newfoundland, Canada for what was supposed to be its 14th trip to the Titanic. So at least they had done this successfully, quote unquote, 13 times when they're not spinning in circles or getting lost. This was going to be the only planned trip to the Titanic in 2023 due to poor weather conditions in the northern Atlantic. On June 18th, the dive operation began at 9:30 a.m. For the first hour and a half of the descent, Titan communicated with the Polar Prince every 15 minutes. At 11:15 a.m., Titan sent its last communication. The sub was supposed to surface at 4:10 p.m. It did not. The U.S. Coast Guard was notified at 7 p.m. All right, so that's already a disturbing gap in time there that is hard to explain. Missing since basically noon, and you don't notify anyone for 7 hours. However, I get it because they're not licensed by anybody. They're operating in international waters. They basically told everyone, we don't want your help. So they didn't ask for it.
Yeah.
Until it was too late.
I feel like those two things are a recipe for a disaster.
You don't cry for help when the accident happens. You get help and prepare for this when it's like a sunny day at the port. You don't cry for help when it's already done. The U.S. Navy recorded an acoustic signature consistent with an implosion about 1 or 2 hours after the Titan submerged. That information was passed on to the Coast Guard, and it was used as a basis for their search area, and thus search and rescue efforts began. Like I said earlier, U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Navy, Canadian Coast Guard, they led the search and rescue efforts. Just to give you an idea of how much was mobilized for this effort, we're talking about aircraft from the Royal Canadian Air Force, the U.S. Air Force, National Guard, Royal Canadian Navy, several commercial and research ships, and remotely operated underwater vehicles, or ROVs, also assisted in the search. I believe they also brought in a very cute-looking ROV named Victor from France.
I saw that one.
It's an adorable, like, underwater Wall-E-looking contraption. So most submersibles have an acoustic beacon that can be detected underwater by rescuers. Surprise, surprise, Titan did not. Titan was, however, equipped with several fail-safes and redundancies in mind that, in theory, was supposed to, if the hull was intact, was still supposed to be able to lift it to the surface and have them be able to survive. And they also had 96 hours of oxygen, okay? So if the hull was intact, well, we have some options ahead of us here. So a couple possibilities that existed if the hull remained intact. All right, number one, the sub had either lost communication or had a major power outage, which means that Titan and its 5 occupants could be stuck underwater with 96 hours of oxygen left and no way to return to the surface. Or it did resurface, but the hull was bolted shut from the outside. So passengers would have no way to open the sub even if it's floating on the surface, and they would just run out of air unless someone found them. However, none of that ended up mattering because on June 22nd, the U.S. Coast Guard discovered debris that was later confirmed to be from Titan, meaning that the sub had likely imploded under the extreme pressure of the ocean, roughly 1,600 feet away from the bow of the Titanic. The aftermath, though, is where I think the story gets pretty interesting. So investigations are still underway to determine the exact reason that the sub imploded roughly an hour and a half into the journey, but most experts agree that the use of cheap and relatively untested materials is what ultimately led to the hull failing. Boeing, University of Washington, and NASA all released statements that distance themselves from any involvement with Stockton Rush, OceanGate, or the design or construction of the Titan submersible. So while Stockton Rush was claiming we have these 3 powerful and respectable entities helping us out, all 3 of them came out later and said, not really. No, we didn't. It was later revealed that allegations of OceanGate's negligence go back as far as 2018. David Lockridge, the former director of marine operations at OceanGate, wrote a report documenting safety concerns that he had about the Titan sub. Lockridge said that he had urged the company to have Titan assessed and certified by an agency. OceanGate had declined to do so, citing an unwillingness to pay. He also said the transparent viewport on the forward end of the submersible was only certified to reach a depth of about 4,300 feet, which is only a third of the depth that you would need to get to the Titanic. Lockridge was also concerned that OceanGate would not perform any non-destructive testing on the vessel's hull before undertaking crewed dives. They didn't even test it before putting people in it. OceanGate said that Lockridge, who was not an engineer, had refused to accept safety approvals from OceanGate's engineering team, and that the company's evaluation of Titan's hull was that it was stronger than any kind of third-party evaluation that Lockridge thought was necessary. OceanGate sued Lockridge for allegedly breaching his confidentiality contract and making fraudulent statements. Lockridge countersued, stating that he had been wrongfully terminated as a whistleblower for bringing up concerns about Titan's ability to operate safely. And then the two parties settled a few months later. In March of 2018, Rob McCallum, a leading deep-sea exploration specialist, emailed Rush to warn him he was potentially risking his client's safety and advised against the submersible's use for commercial purposes until it had been independently tested and classified. Rush replied that he was, quote, tired of industry players who try to use a safety argument to stop innovation. We have heard the baseless cries of, "You are going to kill someone," way too often. I take this as a serious personal insult. McCallum then sent Rush another email in which he stated, I think you are potentially placing yourself and your clients in a dangerous dynamic. In your race to the Titanic, you are mirroring the famous catchphrase, she is unsinkable, which prompted OceanGate's lawyers to threaten McCallum with legal action. So where does this leave us now? Further expeditions to the Titanic are likely to be delayed significantly. Weather wasn't going to be good enough for any more in 2023 anyway. And this tragedy is probably going to put a pause on any more expeditions that could have possibly happened next year. OceanGate closed its Everett, Washington office indefinitely. Reactions from the public have been all over the place, ranging from shock, sadness, anger, confusion. Definitely intrigued, though. Hundreds of memes popped up on social media poking fun at the idea that a few rich people got lost in an expedition that none of us could even imagine being able to afford. I think I actually learned about the situation from a meme, actually. I think I was scrolling through TikTok and I was like, what is this?
That's sad, though. I mean,
for it to happen that fast, yes, it's unbelievable. This entire situation also stands in stark contrast to another disaster that happened just a couple weeks earlier. The scale of the search and rescue efforts and the sensational media attention for Titan compared to those that were lost in a migrant boat disaster in the Mediterranean Sea days earlier sparked a lot of criticism. Migrant boat smuggling an estimated 400 to 750 people left Libya and sank on its way to Italy, resulting in hundreds dead and hundreds still missing, but presumed dead at this point. The search and rescue efforts for Titan likely cost millions of dollars of public funds. So there are plenty of angles to take in this conversation, and we're going to go through all of them here in just a minute, but it's pretty clear that this is going to be one of those core memories for us. Where were you when you found out about the Titan, or where were you when you were talking about it? It's going to be something that probably lives on for a while, or is forgotten immediately, the way that the internet goes. Who knows?
I think the next big thing will cause this to fade, but it will be really important to a select few. And it's just because I think it's a novelty. It is a disaster, but also we've lost astronauts and those stories tend to fade, except for a very notable one, right? The Apollo was the big one that people still talk about.
Oh, I was thinking about the Challenger.
The Challenger, but there are so many more that happened besides those two. And, I will say, I looked into, how many people are really doing this? And, OceanGate was very proud of, the group of people, less than 300, that have gone and visited this site, right? A couple of things that they've done, because they know they've stepped in it. There used to be a page on their website that had all of their previous explorations on there, and that has been pulled.
Interesting. So I couldn't even access their website. I kept trying to look at it, and I couldn't find it.
I've got to their website through a different link.
Well, you're smarter
than
me.
So I went back and found an article from 2018.
Oh, wow.
Written about OceanGate. And then from there was able to weed my way into a landing page.
Okay. So trying to explain maybe why was this such a captivating story. I think it starts, number one, with Titanic. I think that's the very first thing about it. Number two is people are fascinated with wealth, fascinated with people with money. People love a good mystery. For 3-4 days, we had a missing submarine, and, we were already seeing the movie being made of 5 people stuck in a sub with air running out, and then they're rescued at the last moment. But the harshness of it was jarring, I would say. again, I mean, I was making fun of it earlier, just the fact that the memes and the jokes popped up that quick. But
I mean, there were very ridiculously unsafe choices that were made for us to get to this point. And I think that that's the part where people have an easier time finding humor in it than confronting, like, these people truly made those like, this was able to happen. And I was doing research on Bill Price, who is one of the passengers as well. And he has been doing this for years. So he went down on a mission in 2021 to see the Titanic. And that's back when it was just $100,000, not 250.
Oh, still.
To do that, right. And he was, I think, again, had used OceanGate. The submarine that they were in, they were about 3/4 of the way to like the destination depth underwater. And they lost contact, and the crew made the decision to immediately resurface and begin the journey back up. And everybody obviously survived. It was fine. But he did an interview about that and how he, you know, said it was a decision that we all made. I mean, we signed death waivers, but let's go ahead and not take a chance here. And so this would not be the first time that we've seen an OceanGate joyride not pan out. I mean, they say that it's for scientists to go down and discover, but there's really only one scientist that's on board of each of these explorations anyway.
On board the sub, yes, but where most of the scientific research is actually done and conducted, and where most of the scientists themselves actually reside, is in the flagship ship that tows it out there and sends it out there.
But these people are given jobs on board, right? And there was a list of like 7 or 8 jobs that you could have. You're a mission specialist. You go through very light training. Basically, this is how you survive. This is how you put on emergency
gear. Mission specialist just means passenger at this point, because it's you're in an underwater elevator. Like, that's how simple this thing actually is.
But remember when you said that the guy like couldn't even peck out where the wreckage was?
That's
okay. One of the jobs is to monitor and record locations. And so what is the accurate information that we're actually gathering from this stuff? Is this just like a sandbox kind of exercise that they're doing, or are we really using this information? Because if so, I have deeper questions about the quality of research that's being conducted through this.
I think the answer is both. So Stockton Rush was an adrenaline junkie who wanted to keep pushing the limits in ways that were dangerous not only to himself, but to other people who voluntarily signed up to do this. That's the first side of it. This is a rich man who's doing rich man things for the sake of being a rich man who has an adrenaline need that he has to fill. The other end of it is the real and necessary scientific research that is being done on the back of these billionaires' money. And it's almost, and this is a totally different discussion completely, but scientists sometimes have to resort to these privately owned ventures,
the funding,
just to be able to get it funded, because there's not I mean, government funding is what it is, but it only gets you so far. And so sometimes they do have to rely on this Evel Knievel in a bathtub to pay for them to understand the effects of rust underwater, which is extremely important when it comes to like oil rig infrastructure and the recovery of not only just pieces of the Titanic, but further wreckage sites as well.
Right.
Paul-Henri Nargeolet, he was a co-director for the group that owned the wreckage site of the Titanic. Okay, and this group not that long ago did a mission with Nat Geo that basically mapped the entire debris field of the Titanic and everything, and they were going to plan to do it again in a few years to see what is decaying and what is still there, so that they know what can be preserved and do stuff like that. So for people like Stockton Rush, and for people like Shahzada Dawood, and I'm not going to say his son because it's hard to confirm this, but like his family says basically he was dragged there. I'm not going to get into it. They either did or didn't. I can't speak for the family. But a billionaire Pakistani British businessman is not there to do scientific research. He's there to look at the Titanic. There were people who saved up for 30 years to just see it. There are people who mortgaged their homes. The guy who won the lottery. Those guys are the people who are having memes made about them because they're just spending money because they can. The other end of it is the sad part. Like, we lost biggest expert of the Titanic. Nargeolet was the guy, and the director of the group that owns the wreckage site, gone. Just like that. Hamish Harding, he is sort of like the good side of Stockton Rush. He kind of has that same adrenaline junkie feel to him, but he does a very good job of making it like science first, safety first. Like, I'm doing this because I can, but I'm not doing it only because I can. For those people who just paid a bunch of money to go down there and told government agencies to screw off, we don't want your help, we don't want your input, what is our obligation as a society or as a government to come to their rescue? And that's the biggest question I have. Is this took millions of dollars of public funds to send multiple government agencies on a wild goose chase that, if you ask anybody who knows anything, they knew immediately that it was done. They were just doing it because they had to. And so you could say, all right, well, we have to exercise the system sometimes. We have to know that if something does happen, we can actually take care of this. We need to know the logistics of, can we move this plane that's usually staged in San Diego? Can we get it to Newfoundland, Canada in under 24 hours? Can we make this happen? So yeah, we were able to practice the system, but we also practiced the system on a boat that was, waving the help us flag after years of waving the get off my lawn flag, and let us build our underwater coffin. Let us do it in peace. And then when something goes wrong and they scream for help, we spend millions of dollars to go save them. And there's this idea of opportunity cost. We spent millions of dollars to go out there and not rescue them. What could we have spent that money on? And you can insert.
I know.
Insert pay the teacher, save the whales.
To equate it to this, but this story made me think of how Action Park was created.
Yeah.
That is exactly what this story made me think of. And so I, of course, got curious and off track of passengers and was like, tell me everything about submarines. As you mentioned, most submarines are not meant to go more than a couple of feet underwater. And there's it's a very common tourist attraction that you can find all over, even in the United States, where they do stay within US waters. They go just off the coast. It only goes down usually, between 8 and 20-ish feet.
Yeah, super regulated.
And, I even looked at the price. It's $230 to do that. The only other ships that we see that are doing this, which OceanGate is the only company that was actively taking people to the Titanic.
That's right.
To put that into perspective, the Titanic is over 2 miles under the water. The only ships that we've seen in comparison, which is why it's crazy that they rejected the government assistance, is because the only other ships we have that do that are naval submarines.
Not even that, actually.
And they don't even have the capacity to go
not
to those
even.
steps.
They don't even go close to that. Nuclear submarines can go maybe a quarter of that depth.
Well, and I was looking at the class ranking of submarines. I really fell into a rabbit hole in this one.
Didn't we all?
The Wolf class is the one that can go the deepest.
Great name for a sub.
Right. Take a guess how many have been made ever.
No more than 3 or 4.
3.
Okay, yeah.
They have a crush pressure. I think it said around 3,000 feet.
And this guy was trying to go triple that in his.
So there is an image, and we can put it up here if you'd like to see it, that I found from a news source that had the class of submarines versus what the Titan was trying to do. That to me was one of the more forget the memes, just look at that picture and you would. A normal human would assume this doesn't seem safe at all.
No, I mean, even a guy like James Cameron, who went down to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, he even was commenting on just all the red flags. This is a guy who went to the bottom of the world and was like, I'm not getting in that thing. Why would I do that? That's ridiculously stupid. Part of me wants to be well, that's your money. You can do what you want. They signed up for it. Morally, I don't have a problem with much of anything that happened here because I have a very strict policy of mind my business. None of that's my business until I'm paying taxes, sending a plane from San Diego to Newfoundland to pull this guy out of the ocean. That's when it becomes my problem, your problem, everyone's problem. That's my ultimate point on it. I know it kind of makes me sound less
anybody
human.
that had the money could have done that. I looked up the requirements for this trip. Next to nothing. Do you need experience? No. Exclamation point. Have a valid passport, basically, so that you can enter Canadian waters. You must be 18 or older, and you must have $250,000. And then there was a subclause that said passengers that were 17 could go as a non-diving companion.
What does that even mean?
Like I don't know, because nobody's getting
like
out
an emotional
diving,
support
so
child.
They would be doing the exact same thing as everyone else. Maybe they just don't have like a mission that they're fulfilling while they're down there.
I have to take my emotional support child down with me, please. I know he's under 17.
That's called codependency.
The more research I did on this, the more just baffled I was at that CBS reporter said it very well, just the MacGyvered jerry-riggedness of the whole situation.
Seems like this submersible has some elements of MacGyver-y jerry-riggedness.
What compounds the problem is you're not only building a submarine, okay? It is technically way easier to build a rocket and go to space because of the atmospheric pressures. There are technically less issues that you have to deal with, right? There is one atmosphere between here and space. No real problem. That's about 14 pounds per square inch. And so when you're building a spaceship, that's what you have to worry about, and making sure that the inside's good and that one little bit outside. If there's a hole in it, the air will start rushing out, but it won't just crunch or anything like that. It's not that much pressure. Under the water is completely different. I think it doubles in atmosphere every like 30 feet, something like that. So by the time you get down to the Titanic, you're talking about somewhere between 350 and 400 atmospheres of pressure per square inch.
It's a lot.
It's insane. So
and everything down there wants to kill you.
Exactly. Even the wreckage. What that means is your margin for error is extremely small. And so when your margin of error is that small, you don't want to use untested materials. You don't want to do mix and match materials. You know what you also might want to reconsider? Not using recycled anything. If you can buy it from Amazon, it does not go in your submarine. Period.
Rules to live by.
Period. There is one button on that submarine and it looks like an elevator button. You know why? Because he wanted it to look like that. He wanted people to walk in and be like, oh, it's as easy as that. If you want to spend $250,000 to look at a graveyard through a flashlight, all right, be my guest. It's the result of their negligence. And I could go as far as to say just downright stupidity that results in it becoming our problem that I have like a little bit of an issue with. Otherwise, it's just an interesting story. But then once it becomes, I paid for that? Oh, man. It's not so funny now, That's
the moral of the story is save your money and go to space.
Yeah, they have really good 3D animations on YouTube of the Titanic. National Geographic graciously drained the ocean for us so that you can see the whole wreck. And, you can do it for a grand total of $0. I think that's the lesson we have to learn here is if you can explore from your couch, do so.
All together now, which is scarier, the ocean or space?
Ocean.
The ocean.
All right, guys, stay out of the ocean.
Stay out of the ocean.
If you're going to build a vehicle, don't.
Just don't.
See you guys.